challenges await us every day. We have hundreds of conversations. We plan, arrange and clarify. We act. And yet, acting separately, we still make different decisions, which affect the quality of our lives and daily surroundings. By building sustainable cities, spaces and buildings, we can create a better future for us and our children. Let's meet to talk about it. Join Future Builders, a dedicated project created for you to share knowledge, inspiration and impulses to build a better future. Let's talk. Sign up today and take part in conversations with world-renowned architects.
Witamy na kolejnym spotkaniu w ramach projektu Future Builders.
Future Builders project. My name is Piotr Żabicki and I will have the pleasure to talk today to Bogdan Zaha about the future of architecture and construction. Future Builders, it's an international platform where architects, specialists and entrepreneurs meet to confront their experience and their perspective on sustainable architecture of the future. Through this platform, one may establish new contacts and together create future with hope and stress placed on coexistence between man and environment without harm to the latter. And we discussed these matters already with Robert Konieczny, Przemo Łukasik, Zbyszek Maćków, Alvaro Leite-Siza, and today we will talk to Bogdan Zaha. The originator and sponsor of Future Builders project is Aluprof company. Today, our guest is Bogdan Zaha. He is an architect, designer in Zaha Hadid Architects Office, scientist and lecturer, graduate of Bucharest University and Department of Architecture in Timișoara, and then Studio Zaha Hadid at University of Applied Arts in Vienna. He is also working on his PhD there. He joined Zaha Hadid Architects in 2014, where he is specializing in parametrical modeling and advanced methodologies of geometrical design. He elaborated, among others, projects like the residential complex in Mexico, the airport in Beijing, Masaryk railway station, central business district in Prague, and the towers in New York, business district in Frankfurt, or Shenzhen Science and Technology Museum in China. He currently lives and works in London, so let us welcome our guest then. Bogdan, let us talk about the future of architecture. First, a few questions from me, whereas I encourage the audience to ask questions on the chat. Those questions will be read in the second part of our conversation. So let us start from the fact that modern designing tools gave architects the freedom of creation in aesthetics, and it is excellently visible in Zaha Hadid Architects' realizations. But on what other effects of applying these tools in real space we can count upon? Or putting it differently, how parametric architecture will influence improvement of quality of the space of buildings and cities and environment?
Hi, hello. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be here with you. Right, yeah, I mean, just to dive in directly into the subject, I guess. Our work in general, I think, involves a lot of new technologies and a lot of new tools, and we're always trying to be on top of the game in that respect. And yeah, you've touched upon a series of things which we are interested in developing in your introduction, and one of them is this research project that I was involved in the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, together with Patrick Schumacher and my colleagues there. And this research project is also part of the office, and it's being continued in the office as a research project, as a development, and obviously this is becoming embedded into our projects. So it's called agent-based parametric semiology, but if it would be to put it more in layman terms, I guess one could explain it as a tool, a computational tool that will allow us basically to predict how people would move and utilize the spaces that we would design. So basically it would give us, let's say, an understanding, or at least a predictable understanding of what that space or how that space is going to perform for future users, right? So I guess that is, to answer your question more directly, one of the outcomes of how you could implement parametric tools in designing, in architectural creation, so that you can make it on the one hand more efficient, and on the other in terms of spatial use, in terms of architectural qualities, and on the other one, to also respond better to programmatic needs, so to say. So I guess the question can be answered very broadly, because it's a very broad area which one can cover with implementing tools. But I would say that it's similar, like with all other tools which we have at our disposal, right? So either if we talk about BIM or CAD in the past, these were tools which helped us to optimize the way in which we design, in which we how we actually put our efforts into what areas, and how we can focus more on things which are more relevant, and basically take away all of the effort of creating things which now we can do with much more ease, let's say, right? So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yeah, you tell me.
Well, of course, it is a satisfactory response, but let me ask a few more questions, because what is very interesting here is that you are forecasting in a way this movement, traffic of users, and it is both about buildings, so in the scale of the buildings, but I also understand in the scale of town or quarter in urban planning center. But tell me, because you have been working for many years with Patrick Schumacher, so have you checked to what extent these forecasts are in line with real operations of the building later in post-occupancy studies? Have you had comparison of this kind?
Right. Well, in a way, yes, in a sense that, well, the aim of the project in itself, if we are to talk about a research project, is to develop new computational simulations capacities, right, for us to employ. And then, even though this is a new approach to architectural design, this will allow us to better engage with opportunities and challenges of today's society. And in that respect, we are taking, let's say, physical indicators which come from the real world. And yeah, exactly, as you have on the screen, one of the matrices that we used in documenting our research project and the simulations from Unity, which is a gaming engine. I mean, all of these are not taking parameters which are, let's say, abstract, but they are in a way quite real and based in reality, because we are taking all of these parameters which we are inputting into our simulation from real world scenarios, meaning that we have been tracking the before the pandemic and this whole situation with working from home. We have been tracking the movement and the activity of our own colleagues and staff of Zaha Hadid Architects in our own spaces, and we, by trying to come up with this methodology, have always compared the two situations and see if what we were simulating actually reflected how people behave in real life. So I guess, one cannot necessarily in a research project take as an example or a case study a project which you do and then you build and then you test, because that would take a decade or two, especially in the rhythm of building something complex and something which is a bit more than your usual commercial development, right? So obviously we had to come up with a methodology which allowed us to use real-time simulation, so to say, in which we could compare with a scenario which was accessible in terms of time and in terms of comparing with something which was already existing and something which could have been easily mapped and quantified, right? So we did start by analyzing some time ago. I mean, by we, I mean me and the rest of my colleagues, sometimes with other departments in the office as well, because we have a code team as well who has been doing part of this research as well for many, many years already. There was a project which we did for Movable London, where concepts from other people have come in, and we tried to see and simulate what a walkable London would look like. So that also ties into this research somehow. So it's everything kind of built one on top of the other, and it's never straightforward. It's never one thing. You always build on top of previous experiences. So why I'm saying this is that we have been we have started by tracking people's movement in our own exhibitions, for example, in exhibition spaces that we have designed for our own projects. So we were interested in that respect, where people would go and what people would look at and how the people would move in the space. So then you know where to put the most interesting design and how to optimize the exhibition, so to offer the most of the best experience that these people have in that space. So in that sense, it's not only about, as you said, predicting behavioral pattern within a city or having people flowing through a space. These kind of crowd simulations and pushing people through have been there for a long time, and also offices like Bureau Happold or Arab or any other companies that do these kind of simulations have them for a long time. But what we are looking for is a more subtle refinement of this, and not only knowing how much time people need to evacuate a space, but also how people actually behave within the space, like how many interactions people have with whom, what people are interested in to have in that space as opportunities. So that's why we focused more on looking into an event scenario, meaning that we have started by looking into, okay, you have a space which is this social space that would maybe be the spill-out space of an event scenario, right? Where you have, let's say, some conferences or meeting spaces that then people in a break, they come out and they start mingling and meeting and networking with each other, right? So then in that respect, we started building kind of a logic from a very, very simple behavioral model to adding more and more complexity. So in a sense that people would, or our agents, let's say, that we simulate within that space at first would just be able to recognize the spatial boundaries. Then they would start to recognize architectural features. Then they would start to recognize functional elements. Then they would start to recognize other agents and acknowledge them. And if you would say that you have, I don't know, two teams which meet in that space, then one agent from one team will need to speak to every other agent within the other team. And until all of this scenario would play out, we would simulate this. And obviously this takes a lot of time. So you need to figure out how to speed up this and how to, employ machine learning to speed up that and not rely on the animation necessarily, but being able to construct and build prediction model from that. So we had the help of mathematicians as well and other people who are outside of our office and supported us with their knowledge from their previous research. So it's kind of a very big topic. So it's not very straightforward, and you cannot really put your finger on the problem and say that is it, because I think that once you delve into it and dive into it, you will figure out that there's so many aspects that one could research that it's very, very difficult to tackle within a given time frame, or let's say a very short time, or to base your research on, as you said, as an example, on post-occupancy studies and so on. So we went on figuring out what is the best case scenario in which we can compare a post-occupancy study to something which we already had at our disposal. And this was our own space, our own exhibition spaces, and the experience from other people who have been doing that and tracking, say, other spaces or companies and the behavior of the people who work there. And I think this is common practice by now in research. So, and if people are afraid of being tracked and so on, I believe that this is the positive aspect of tracking people in space that one can look at and implement in a research which actually can improve the space that we future design, right?
Clear. And now coming back or moving more from the scientific part to the practically architectural space, do you believe that architects are ready to transfer their interest from aesthetics to other matters related to creating sustainable environment? Because still, most of the time, it seems to me we are spending on modeling the solids and facades and the functional system rather than calculating the influence of the investment project on environment. So what is your opinion, and what does it look like in Zaha Hadid Architects? How are you calculating this influence of the investment project on environment?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think, yes, the answer is yes. We should definitely focus on the impact which we have on our built environment. And we within the office have a department which is our sustainability group. It's called like that, as I think most big companies or people that can afford to have such a such a resource within their office are doing. So we also have this department of sustainability who is helping us in all of our projects. And of course, yes, we have to be aware of the impact that our buildings have on the built environment. But I don't think that the discussion should be put as shifting attention or placing the attention on one or the other. I don't think it's a discussion of whether or. I think it's a discussion of and, in the sense of adding to. So I don't think that we need to disregard any of the aspects, right? Because architecture, at the end of the day, is a quantum, it's a multitude of things which come together to create a building. So I don't agree with people who say we should shift focus or we should concentrate only on that aspect. And I think that this is wrong, because our responsibility as architects is not only to build buildings, because if that would be our responsibility, to build buildings to the best technical efficiency of the standard of the era, then we wouldn't be called architects, we would be called engineers. And I think as an architect, you have a social responsibility as well as how that building performs socially as well, aesthetically and environmentally and technically and all of the rest of the things, right? That's why we're architects, and that's why we put together things in this thing which becomes a building at the end of the day, right? Which has an architecture. So that's why I think that the architectural discourse is more complex than aesthetics, than ethics, than technical aspects, than environmental issues, and all of these things, right? In the UK, there's a lot of emphasis on accessibility, on gender equality, on sustainability from so many points of view, that I don't think it's that clearly separated, and I don't think it's separated at all as a discourse. I think it's a whole as a discourse.
Obviously, yes, architecture is a multi-layer, multi-plane creation with all aspects taken into account and not forgetting about any of them. But you mentioned the social role of architecture, that we actually design for the society, because out of the, everybody use the social space. Doesn't it mean that the most gifted architects should be employed on state jobs in local authorities rather than working for private investor, for example?
Well, this is very political, let's say, as a discussion. So I don't think so. No, I think that clients are there, and they are, let's say, they are empowered by the different organizational, political, societal situations in different countries. And you will find let's say the Western world, which we are more or less all used to in a very similar way, which behaves in one quite different way than a society in East Asia, for example, where they understand private and public in a different relation than we do. But I think we as architects are there to negotiate and to fulfill our role as professionals, and not our role as politicians or, actors in the social or political system of the country. So I don't think that we can put it in those kind of political terms, to be honest. So I think that we are there to respond to the needs of the society, and the way that society is organized is not in our business. Because all of these discussions have been there in the past, like what is the role of us as architects? Can't we influence world leaders to change policy? And so, no, we cannot. Our tools are limited to architecture. That's our profession. That's what we know how to do. The job of politicians is their job, and our job is to build buildings, to design buildings, right?
Of course, yes, this was a provocative question, but now we are thinking of the future and of how to shape this future at a certain stage in a best possible way. There used to be some philosophical concepts that the world is to be governed by specialists, and that question of mine was actually related to this, because I would hope for, in our political system, for the voice of architects to be more clearly heard. because I don't know how in the UK, but in Poland, all architects stay far away from politics. And because of this, we are absent from those decision-making circles in the authorities, and therefore our influence on our spatial reality is lesser. But let us leave these matters and please tell me, back to the green architecture, what barriers do you encounter when implementing your boldest and greenest buildings?
Right. Well, just to touch base on what you said, I think that before I think that our capacities and our tools that we have at our disposal, and by that I mean all of us architects, because it's not, I don't think that, maybe some of us have an edge over some others, but that's like in all domains, right? Some have access to better tools than others, but generally I think it's kind of leveling up in that respect, because contemporary tools are mostly accessible to everybody by now. But I think that in this aspect of architects being involved and having a voice, in the UK, the RIBA and the ARB are the two professional organizations who are dealing with this. And I do believe that in Poland you do have the architects register or council or organization, which obviously organizes the discipline in your country. And I believe that they should be the ones which mitigate and negotiate, right? And need to deal with the authorities as well in respect of policy and implementing new policy like green architecture and all of the aspirations that we might have. But I do accentuate we, because I think that we need to be always acting as a whole in that respect. And I think that for us to be acting as a whole, we need to be represented, right? So that's, I think, the role of those respective associations in the UK, in Poland, or everywhere else in Europe, or you have the architects, the International Architects Council, which is the UIA, and they deal with this and connect the different organizations worldwide. So I think that there is representation. It's just a matter of us individually. If we want to get involved in that respect, we should do it via these agencies, I believe. And to answer directly the question with green and boldest architectures, I think that is always tailored to the possibilities of the project, right? And the possibilities which are offered by the client. And I think that your responsibility as an architect is always to try to implement the best strategies which you are capable of implementing. And with respect to society being organized by having the best professionals out there dealing with the best projects or the major projects or whatever you want to call it or how you put it, I think this is a process which actually churns professionals as by how it is organized, in the sense that, if you're not able to do something, for sure there's someone else who's going to do it better. So I think that is our responsibility to try to do it the best we can every time. So, obstacles will always be there, and even the boldest client will want the cheapest building, because finances, I think they're generally more or less looked at in a very similar way by the richest person or by the poorest person, And I think it's down to ethics, and it's down to you reading your client and understanding what the need is and your ability to explain what the benefits are from implementing one or the other system. And I think that there are, benefits to implementing more green and more sustainable approaches, because those usually give you a better future perspective in terms of economy, in terms of performance, in terms of, everything as a package at the end of the day.
Clear. Well, in the former meeting, we were discussing this issue that the green sustainable construction is more energy saving and it consumes less resources during the whole lifetime. And it seems to me that this aspect of designing can be very easily conveyed to the investor, unless the investor is only building for the moment so that they sell with profit just after completing the construction. Then their activities are less looking into the future, and we should, I guess, somehow fight against this by explaining that they will obtain better price for the building because the client building it from them will want to buy a more energy-saving building. And to what extent this green architecture is in the UK a trend, to what extent it is a marketing necessity, and to what extent it results from inner convincement. How do you think? Because it is, of course, a very fluid question, but I always consider when investor comes and wants to order the green certificates, to what extent this is the requirement of marketing activities, and to what extent inner convincement that we have to operate like this.
Well, that's a very good point. And, I think that as a society as a whole, we should have expectations, right? And I think it's kind of down to that, in a sense that you could try to implement strategy in a sense or another, with one which is more efficient, but it will always be perceived differently in the UK or in Europe or in America or in China, because people relate to it differently. And this relation is, as you said, coming also from things like green certificates and other compensations or rewards, which the authorities or different regulatory bodies offer to the people who implement them. And I do think that has a substantial role. Obviously, there's the risk of over-regulating things, which we should avoid. But there are also regulations which do come in, to help us and in our favor in terms of implementing these kind of strategies. So I think that is very different from country to country. And why I'm saying that is because we are working around the globe, and it's really hard to focus on just one country, because it's rather, that's why I like to put it in more abstract and broad terms, because I think that it's easier to understand and to relate to, depending on the local system. But I do think that us as individuals, as members of society, as members of the trade and so on, should have our expectations, and we should have high expectations. And I think it's our duty to show what these are and ask that these expectations be fulfilled. And I think that is also towards authorities, towards investors, towards our fellow people which we live among. And to answer in short, I think all of these aspects are important. So I don't think there's one correct answer to this question.
And please tell me about the situation in the UK regarding implementation of BIM, because in Poland there is quite a lot. About 90% architectural companies are small architectural offices who have a certain barrier to enter the BIM market. And the saturation with BIM software is not yet quite common here. Many small offices are still working in CAD, And how is this situation looking in your area? Whether the state participates in modernization of the software or supports it, because this is to the benefit of the environment. Because in BIM you can model lots of various aspects of the investment project which cannot be done in CAD. What is this looking like in the UK? Please tell us.
Well, yes, I mean the UK is a very liberal society, and it's in that respect, the profession here, as you might know, it's regulated quite differently than it is in continental Europe, in a sense that you can design even without being an architect, but you should not call yourself an architect in doing so. While in the rest of Europe, my experience in Austria, for example, or in Romania, where I've also worked in, tells me that in Europe you need to be a registered architect to do a project at all. So and I think that there's a balance that one needs to strike. And for example, in the UK, you don't need to register as an architect necessarily, but there are certain constraints which a client will impose on you. So I think that here it's more up to the investor and the client for what their aim is and what their goals are and what their requirements are, because often to reach a certain project status and to have certain certifications, you need to do things in a certain way, right? To have people which are certified, to have professionals which belong to certain associations, to which have certain certifications. You need models which, just to come back to the question of BIM, that are built like that or that are designed like that and this relates to how they're building the building and how the contractor is used to building the building. So I think that it's quite complex, but usually people or let's say big offices, most of them, if not all of them, do implement these technologies. So BIM is widely spread. We do use BIM for all of our projects because it's just making your life that much easier. And also sometimes it's a requirement to submit that project in BIM. For example, if I relate to Austria, where I've worked in, some projects there, you do need to submit your BIM model with the project. For example, in Romania, I know BIM is widely implemented, even though people don't use it the same way that we do. We use it in Zaha Architects, for example. At the end of the day, it's a tool, and it's a tool which will only make your project better. So we are not shy of using all of the most advanced tools that exist. But also, I think you need to justify the use of these tools by what projects you do. Because obviously, if you do only family houses, it's a bit hard to invest in software which will take out of your budget half of it, and then you wonder why you're doing this profession in the first place. So I think that there's obviously a certain responsibility which you need to take upon yourself and say, okay, if I do this type of work and these are the tools that I need, and I'm convinced that I can do this project well with these tools, then I do it like that, and that's why some people, let's say, still use just CAD, which they do in Austria as well, for example, right? Which people do here as well, which they do everywhere at the end of the day. But it's a matter of how your business model is organized, how you understand time saving and resource saving by implementing more modern tools. Obviously, it takes time. Obviously, you need to do a business plan which factors that in, and you need to have certain expectations which you need to see how much time and how much resources and how many projects you need to implement those. So I think it's a complex discussion, but it's up for everybody, and it really depends on which projects you wanna do. So if you're aiming for big projects, you obviously need to go big, right, and to scale up your practice in general.
And how do you think, how development of these tools or maybe application of artificial intelligence in the future, how will it change our profession?
Well, I'm unsure that it's changing it because it's we are still designing buildings. It's just making it better at the end of the day, and it's making us more aware of what we're doing. If architects were behaving by intuition and by ancestral knowledge, which was tried and tested via more primitive or more simpler means of designing, obviously that took an amount of time to build, to test, to see if it works, and so on, right? Which in the past was built upon tradition. But nowadays, with new tools and with predictions and with simulations, we can cut short these times. And I think that's the most important thing. It's time saving, and it's also improving much quicker the results which we can achieve, right?
So we will be resting much more and our work will be much more pleasant because IT tools are helping us and saving our time. I'm asking whether this will change our profession because I dream for the future to have two sensors on my head which will be reading my intentions, and the machine will be actually suggesting me after initial rework, offering me a concept or range of concepts from which I will be picking from left or right, like it or not, and I will be then lying on the beach and enjoying my life. So this vision is by all means good.
Yeah, I think you put it right, but just to sorry to interrupt you, but I think you've put it right in the sense that you have sensors on your head that read your thoughts, and that's the most important thing, your thought. And I think that the most of the time that we spend is actually on thinking. And how we draw a line, that it's a machine that reads it automatically or we move the mouse a couple of millimeters, I think that's not the biggest effort. The biggest effort is actually choosing, it's actually thinking, it's actually churning through information and realizing what is the best way to implement these things, because we can talk about sci-fi visualization and so on, but we do have at our disposal nowadays device that you can put on your head, and by AR technology it can help you build more precisely on site, visualizing on top of your building site what the thing needs to become, so these technologies do help us in that sense. I don't think we're there yet where sensors read out the or maybe we are, but we just don't know of them yet, right? So if that would be the case, yeah, sure, we would be happy to implement them. But it's the same as VR, right? You go into this virtual world and you have everything built around you, but you can already see it, and it's a different sensory reaction that you have to it, right? And then you obviously will have a different sensibility of changing that or this detail or that or this massing or how you view things and other things like this, right? And what your sensation of being within that unbuilt building almost physically, in this virtual reality is different, obviously, than seeing it on the screen. So I think that what is changing is us being in contact with the future in the present, in a different way than we were used to before, because we were in a certain sense, but it's just our, let's say, capacity of visualizing things is becoming easier and easier in that sense. I don't think we are resting more in that respect, that we can drink a cocktail on the beach or wherever, in a bar or whatever. I mean, I like cocktails, don't get me wrong, but I think that the time that we actually spend on design is mostly thinking and trying to figure out things and getting it right.
Please tell us about your current projects. What is engaging you now, apart from scientific work? So what projects you are working on and you could boast about now? What are you most involved in now?
Well, I'm since I joined the Architects in 2014, I've been part of the design team, which was Zaha's design team that is involved with most of the projects in the office, and we are try. So our responsibilities is are always to try to find new and the best solutions for every project. So we are involved in most projects in the beginning phases the most, and then in the design development of the project, we are involved in keeping track of the project, keeping the design aims and ambitions of that project. So I am involved in quite a number of projects, and I think that over the years, the range of projects is over a couple of hundreds. So it's really hard to keep track. But when you enumerate these projects that I've been working on in the beginning in the presentation, these are only the projects which we are allowed to talk about, because many of our projects are confidential, many are not yet being made public. So obviously we cannot talk about these, but we have exciting projects. A lot of them we have in China, as as everybody knows, China is on a very different track than the rest of the world, accelerating a lot, and we do deal a lot with the Chinese market. We do have projects everywhere else in Europe, in America. We had a proposal for a project in Poland last month, but we just got a mention for this new theater in Torun. There are many different programs of architecture which we tackle as well. I cannot really tell you what the project which I'm working on now is, but it's usually ranging from very big master plans, from a couple of million square meters, to pavilions and so on.
Clear. I understand that, of course, you participate in many various projects in the especially initial phase. And do you like some specific type of architecture more than anything else, like residential buildings or public utility buildings? Which type of architecture is your most favorite, where you like to work on most? Can you specify something like this?
Well, it's always exciting if you have a free hand, let's say, right, to do your best. But it's also good to have some boundaries which are offered to you, because if somebody tells you design the best thing you can, you might have a problem, because I think that our speciality or our capacity is actually to solving problems, and not necessarily being artistically creative gratuitously, without any kind of reason. So I think that to answer your question, everything, but to be more specific, there's obviously a balance between restrictions and the freedom of your expression. So anything that offers a good challenge, but is also something that is going to end up being a good architectural result, I think is welcome. So I don't really have any preference in terms of program or destination, or it's always nice to have diversity, and I think that's the best thing which I enjoy about my job, is the possibility of designing something new almost every month, and that's great, and that's exciting, and that's what's driving us, I think, all in Zaha, in architects at least.
And what is your vision of the city of the future? What will they look like? Will they be dynamic, or in liquid forms, or more orthogonal? How do you think what our cities will look like?
Well, I think that we need to figure out what we as a society want, in a sense of how we want to live together, right? Because as you can see today, we are both in the same space, and in the same time we're in two different countries. So I think that this is one important aspect, right? We need to figure out how we want to interact, if we want to bring people close together again, if we can do that at all in the same way that we did before. Obviously, I was just looking at an article the other day. They're implementing now in Milan for the Winter Olympics flying taxis. So obviously, all the things which you see in sci-fi, I think it's reflecting directly the wishes of us all, and most probably it's the thing which we're tending to, right? And if you look at all the sci-fi movies, I think we're getting closer and closer to these kind of cities where we will have the capacity and freedom to fly and to move faster and quicker and more efficiently. Obviously, there's also the need for retreat. There's also the need for quiet, for relaxing places. So I think we need to be mindful of having this balance and trying to figure out the best way in which we can live together.
Well, the last from my part of questions is the question I ask each of the people I talk to. Why do you participate in Future Builders program? Why are you talking to us on this platform?
Because generally I cannot say no, if that's an answer, and because I guess any of these events, I think they're beneficial. And even if we don't say much, because none of us really do if you think about it, I think it's a good reflection time, and people pausing and we listening to each other, we sometimes find out that most of us think the same, even if with subtle differences, and those mainly are given by the different experiences that we have. So I like a challenge in that respect, and I'm also happy to share, and I'm also happy to listen to other people and their experiences. So I guess that if we do it, we all have to participate in a way or another.
And this is why I ask this question, to always hear the answer. It is worthwhile talking, because talking helps us to understand each other and to develop ourselves. So this is the goal also for our meetings. So let us now give our audience a chance. I will read some of the questions, and Bogdan, let me ask you to answer. For example, Maciek asks whether development of parametrism and IT tools may result in the profession of architect disappearing with the time passing.
No, I don't think so, because tools don't have the capacity to think critically, at least not yet. So until complete artificial intelligence is developed, where robots start taking over and we end up in a Terminator scenario, I don't think so. I really don't think so, because I think that we should be glad that we have tools at our disposal, because it's the one thing which allows us to, first of all, do our job better, and second of all, it just diminishes monotony, and it creates a more diverse and more exciting environment for us all.
Well, this is what we discussed earlier, and you highlighted that here in the concept, in the intellect, there is what cannot be replaced by machines. So let us do hope that that will be the case. Valdemar is asking, asking about your research. Is your research based on some kind of inquiring people, invigilation? Is preliminary data taken from city monitoring, from CCTV, to check the flow of people, to study the flow of
Yeah,
people?
so yes, as I said before, the data that I didn't go in detail into it, but yes, our data for the simulations, in which we do comparisons, comes from CCTV and sensor movement trackers which we have in our office, and these provide locations of people walking through our people which were walking through in our previous reception space, and how they would spend their day within that space, meaning that you would be able to see for how long a spot was occupied with respect to another one. So it was more like a heat map, meaning that you would know which area was used for how long. So you wouldn't know exactly whom by name, but you would know that there are that X amount of people which use the space in that configuration or in that way during the time of a day, right? And then by that, these you could factor in your simulation, and you could say, okay, I have X amount of people which I need to simulate to respond to the scenario. And then these people, some of them are employees, some of them are guests, some of them are collaborators, some of them are clients. So they would all have different traits, meaning that they would all look for something different in that space. Maybe employees just go there for a coffee, or they go there for a short meeting, or for a longer team meeting, and then they would use that space in a certain way. And clients, maybe they would just come in, go to the reception and say, okay, to speak to X, Y, Z, and then that person would maybe come and meet them and greet them, and maybe they would have a short chat in that reception space, or they would go into a designated meeting space. So all of these things you factor into your simulation as capacities of your agent, and then you would play out, this 100 times, and then you would switch scenario and you would play it another 100 times for another 8 hours each time, So these add up to very, very long simulation times, which then you would compare, and then you would compare the heat maps between themselves, and you would compare the heat maps to the actual heat map from the data, and then you would try to see which ones of them match. And if your prediction is actually right, that you could optimize that space by cutting a corner short, or by infilling some spaces which are not used, or if you would move certain objects from one place to another within the space, how would that influence behavior, and so on and so forth, right? And you could add upon this more and more and more parameters of complexity to the intelligence of your agents. But sometimes you don't need too much. I mean, sometimes simple things work, right? Once you start simulating, you will be surprised to how few parameters you actually need to replicate something credible.
And my last question, because time is pressing on us. Martin is asking about parametricism, and he asks how parametricism can be helping in revitalizations of municipal spaces or buildings. People say that more and more of those buildings have to be revitalized because we have to take care of the existing resources and give them a new life. Do you see here some special place for parametricism?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think it was embedded in my last answer, but the space which we were actually tracking and using for simulations was within an existing building. It's a medieval school, or let's say, more 1800 school, which is a historic building in London. And this was never intended to be an office space, right? So I guess the way that we designed the building was trying to make the most out of what we had. So these tools are precisely what we could employ in measuring, simulating, and then mapping and designing accordingly from these processes in a better way that space. Because I think that only with using these tools, computational tools, this is the only way in which we can actually design in a pertinent way spaces which otherwise we would just be able to do by intuition. And I think that's the most important thing. And yes, I think that these tools do have a very, very great role to play within our existing environment, especially. Obviously, it's much easier to build a new because you can do everything much more flexibly, right? But once you start putting in place these systems, then you will see that you will have better solutions to the existing problem as well. So, and I mean, to relate to the question of parametricism, I think there's a distinction to be made between computational tools, which are a part of the discourse and are essential for the discourse to exist. But parametricism is much more than just the tools. It's a way of thinking about architecture and its role as a societal tool of making the people be closer to our architectural intent, let's say. But that's a very complex subject, so I think we can spend another hour or two talking about it.
I hope that we will have an opportunity discussing it at some later stage. Today we spent quite a lot of time to discuss a certain change of way of thinking about designing, because parametricism is such an attempt. And let us hope that the tools and all new ideas will enable creation of a better world, the world in which investment projects will be less harmful to the environment and man, in a more friendly way, will be coexisting with the environment. Bogdan, thank you very much for our meeting and our conversation. And I would also like to thank the originator and sponsor of the event, Aluprof company, and everybody involved in implementation of this project. Let me invite to you all to discussing the future of architecture. Thank you.